Hi, you're listening to the Diablo Podcast. We are online at diablopodcast.com. I am the host, Flux, and in this show I am talking to Seth, is it Schiesel?
Schiesel.
Schiesel, and you are a tech writer and reporter, and you work for the New York Times.
That's right. I actually am no longer considered a tech writer. I'm actually in the culture section.
Ooh.
And I've been there for about 6 years now. And I previously was in the business section when I first joined the Times, and then we did used to have a standalone technology section. But about 6 years ago, the editors came to me, and they actually realized that video games were becoming the next mass form of entertainment. And they asked me if I would like to write about video games, not as tech, not as business, but as media, entertainment, and culture. And so for roughly the last 6 years, I've been writing for the culture and arts pages. And I started off doing that as a reporter and writing features about video game culture and about different games. But for the last few years, I've been a critic. My title has changed, and I've basically just been reviewing games and writing about games sort of more subjectively. And what's cool about it is that my video game reviews now run right next to the ballet reviews and the television reviews and the movie reviews and the music reviews and stuff like that. So we're sort of out of the tech ghetto a little bit.
Yeah, credit to your bosses for realizing, for riding the wave there.
Yeah, people always ask me sort of, did I have to convince them to let me do this? And it was really them coming to me. And it was really, the timing was perfect because this was just before the Wii came out and, obviously before the 360. But what we really started to see, if you go back maybe 6 years to the middle of the last decade, was video games really starting to emerge from their traditional, or what had been a traditional sort of geek mode, where it really wasn't considered mainstream entertainment. But once we started seeing things like the Wii, like Guitar Hero, and like World of Warcraft, we really started to see video games sort of come back into the cultural mainstream. And beside the fact that people who had been playing games for their whole lives were now getting into their 30s and starting to have children themselves, which really made it sort of more mainstream and more respectable in some ways.
And writing articles about games for the New York Times.
Yeah, well, we like to think that we were sort of part and parcel of it. I remember when Nintendo announced the Wii, and the traditional gaming press didn't get it at all, because it wasn't high def, and it wasn't trying to compete with Sony and Microsoft on pixel counts and polygons and stuff like that. But we recognized that this was the beginning, or one of the elements of the beginning, of video games returning to the cultural mainstream, really where they hadn't been since the early 80s, the arcade heyday. And so us writing about it and, different companies putting together different products really sort of worked hand in hand. And now obviously we see with Facebook games and mobile games that electronic games generally are more popular than they've ever been, and it's really sort of reaching a broader audience than ever.
Have you written your Angry Birds article yet?
I didn't write about Angry Birds. What's funny is that, it's actually telling that it was a different writer at the Times who writes for a different section, I think for the style section, who ended up writing about her obsession with Angry Birds. And it really was the perfect piece because that game really wasn't aimed at me as a core gamer. Yeah. It really was aimed at women and at a new audience. And there's something wrong with that. So actually, I never wrote about Angry Birds personally, because I never actually played it very much. But once again, as games reach a broader audience, we have different sorts of people writing about those games as well.
Well, yes, and if you were going to given the choice, do you want to go to Blizzard offices and play Diablo III, or do you want to write about Angry Birds? I think you probably would have chosen the former.
Absolutely.
I think it worked out pretty well for your choice.
Sure.
So just before you joined the New York Times, how were you? I assumed you were a journalist as well. Were you writing about games and tech stuff, and you upgraded from, you worked on GameSpot or GameSpy or something like that?
No, nothing like that at all, actually. Before I joined the Times in 1996, and I joined the Times as a business writer. I actually covered the big telecommunications and media companies, all during the original .com boom. And before that, I had actually been an editorial writer at the Boston Globe for about a year and a half. And before that, I had been in law school, where I had actually dropped out to go to the Globe. But I've always been a gamer. Even though I wasn't writing about games, I've been playing video games and arcade games going back to right around 1980. The original arcade boom, and the original consoles. We can walk through that if you like, but no, I've been a gamer all along, but it was really only, about 6 years ago that my hobby became my work, and, my editors, luckily, recognized that.
It's nice you had a lifetime of research to back up your career plans.
Well, it's one of these things, right, where if you're going to be a movie critic, hopefully you've loved movies your whole life. Or if you're going to be a music critic, hopefully you've been watching or seeing music and listening to music, and hopefully you didn't just start when you got the job.
You mentioned you have a long backlog. I clicked your author title on the New York Times page, and thinking you'd probably just written a few pieces for them. And of course, it's 14 pages of returns or something like that. As you say, you've been doing it for many years. And I burned through a good chunk of my monthly New York Times allotment.
Oh no!
Some of your past stuff.
Well,
that was last month. It's now reset, so we're all good again. And I saw an interesting piece that caught my eye was one from 2005 on the very early days of World of Warcraft. You were at Blizzard and talking to the guys about how they were adding in patches, and there was some whole discussion about putting like horses' heads on the outside of some monument statue thing that you included.
Well, what that was, that piece in 2005 was actually pretty important for me, and I think for Blizzard, and for WoW, because if you remember, WoW came out in November of 2004. It was the week of Thanksgiving. And it was obviously a huge sensation. We can walk through that. I started playing that first week there. I started playing on one of the day 3 servers. And the mainstream...
It was just for research, of course, right? Purely for research.
No, not at all. No, it was actually for fun.
Okay, good.
No doubt. I had just started writing about games for a living at that point. But I had played some earlier MMOs. And I've been playing... online games since before there was a web. I played a lot of MUDs in the early 90s when it was all text-based Unix shell. But that piece in 2005 about Blizzard was really the first mainstream article that sort of introduced World of Warcraft to the mainstream and to the broader world outside of the gaming community. Because I immediately recognized that something incredible was happening. They reached their 1-year subscriber goal in a matter of days. And I was sort of there playing, and I realized that this was something that would be of interest to the broader public. And what's interesting is that story actually was a cover story for what we used to have a standalone technology section called Circuits. So I was a technology writer for about a year and a half, 2 years, in between the business section and the culture section. And I'd only done a couple of video game stories, though, for that technology section, and when that section died, that's when the culture editors came to me and asked me to join the culture section. But yeah, that piece in 2005, that was Blizzard's first time really being exposed to a mainstream audience. And I was the first journalist that really sort of got it, and that I think that they felt like they could trust. Because, in the game industry, it is very insular, and there's a lot of, I'll call it insecurity, because games have often been misrepresented in the mainstream press, and it's natural that people who make games are naturally wary. Usually, of someone parachuting in from a place like the Times, like, well, does he play these games? Does he get it? Or is he just trying to stereotype us? And so that piece was really the beginning of a very solid relationship, I think, between myself and Blizzard. The horse heads you're thinking of, those actually ended up appearing in Karazhan. But Karazhan, the 10-man dungeon, didn't appear until one of the later expansions. I think it was Burning Crusade. And they had hoped to get Karazhan into WoW Vanilla, but it didn't work out for various reasons, so they ended up holding Karazhan to be the intro dungeon in Burning Crusade, I believe. And yeah, it was Burning Crusade. And those horse heads still appeared. If you remember, in the lobby of Karazhan, there's this whole theme, and the first boss battle is actually in the stables of Karazhan on the ground floor there.
So you got an interesting bit of a preview there as part of your article. I wonder if anyone picked up on that, having read that piece that you wrote, and then years later, the article finally gets in the game.
I doubt that many people were going back to read my stories at that point, but that's just a little sort of tidbit. And what it goes to show, though, is how much effort and time Blizzard really does put into these things. That was a dungeon that they were working on, right there at launch, and it didn't see the light of day for about another 2 years. And that really, without blowing smoke, that really is what distinguishes Blizzard, because they do put so much time and effort into making sure everything is as good as they can make it before they release it to the public.
Yeah, another thing that piece focused on, I'll have the link to this piece on the DiabloPodcast.com news post, by the way, if any listener wants to check it out in more detail. And you can burn up one of your monthly page reads on the New York Times, but it's well worth it.
I'm not going to suggest you cut and paste, but it happens anyway.
Well, it's like a 3-page might have a little quote, but
like I said,
it's worth the read, of course.
But I'm pretty aware of that. That's actually one of the funny things, just as an aside, I didn't mean to cut you off, that, on the Times website, people pay attention a lot to like the most emailed stories and stuff. And I told my bosses, when I started writing about tech and games, like, look, people who actually know what's going on aren't using the email link on the New York Times page. They're either just sending the direct link or they're cutting and pasting the whole story. So those, most emailed lists don't always reflect exactly what people are looking at, especially when you're talking about a cyber savvy audience like gamers.
Yeah, or they'll put it in their gaming blog or something like that.
Yeah, of course. And I'll just point out, actually, and I'm sorry, I'll let you get back to your point, that I've actually written a number of articles about Blizzard and about World of Warcraft and various other games they've made. So if you just search for my name, Schiesel, Schiesel, and Blizzard, you'll see a bunch of stories. I actually went to Korea with Blizzard and did a big front page story about the worldwide reach of WoW several years later, in addition to a big story about the South Korean gaming scene, which is incredible and which is basically all built around StarCraft.
Mm-hmm. Have you been back to Korea since StarCraft 2 came out?
No, I haven't, and
that'll be a follow-up for you there.
Yeah, at some point. I'm not sure exactly what's happening with that. I haven't followed it that closely. I know it was one of the real challenges for Blizzard making StarCraft 2 was trying to, for them it was almost like trying to make, chess 2.0, in the sense that StarCraft had become so ingrained as part of pop culture in South Korea, and as part of the esports, professional gaming scene, that it'd be like someone coming along and say, "All right, I'm going to improve baseball now and give you a new version of baseball." But, well, no, the old version is fine. So I'll be curious to see how StarCraft is doing in Korea.
Yeah, I'd be curious to read that article if you write it someday. From what I've heard, they're having a lot of trouble getting traction. I mean, there was initially a big push, but StarCraft's been so perfectly balanced over so many years.
And like I said, yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. Like I said, it's sort of the original game. They're not looking for a sequel there, right? Once again, it's sort of like the rules of football or baseball here. You get new players, you get new strategies, but the actual rules generally tend to stay the same.
And they have 2 StarCraft expansions coming up, and they're doing patching, and people are used to the first game in the first place. So I think it'll be a better comparison in a couple of years, but, obviously there's a lot of money riding on this for Blizzard and their partners in Korea.
Absolutely. Although they're not really lacking for money.
Yeah.
and WoW is doing very well there as well anyway, so.
WoW keeps the lights on, yes. So one of the things that you mentioned a moment ago is what we noticed reading the Diablo III piece, is why I actually contacted you in the first place to talk with you about this, not knowing your history much, but just because it was obviously fluent in gaming culture and technology, and it had a clue about what Blizzard was about and what games were about. And quite often we see these mainstream pieces, as you kind of alluded to, that are, they're written like sort of a cultural anthropologist visiting a dark culture, visiting deepest Africa or something. It's like, look at these curious people and their curious computers, and it's like, really, thanks, Jane Goodall. But yours was, fluent, and not only did you know the piece, but you were able to write the piece so it was valuable, I thought, to, insiders like myself and the readers of my site, and also to the general New York Times audience.
Well, that's what it's really all about. That's the hard part.
You briefly sort of mentioned what the character classes were, but you didn't put some elementary explanation of a barbarian is a large man in a fur bikini hitting things with sticks, Like there was enough detail to get people through, but it wasn't bogged down in nonsense.
Well, thank you. That's what we try to do. Whether it's writing about video games or science or culture or business, writing about covering the telecommunications companies 12 years ago and when people didn't really even know what the internet was, and what different cell phone technologies were. In any specialized area, what we try to do at the Times, like you mentioned, is write in such a way that the subject matter expert in that subject can get something out of it, while also being intelligible and understandable and interesting to the intelligent layperson who's just interested in the world around them. It's sort of very similar to that, we'll have a review of a 50 Cent concert or a Jay-Z concert, and there'll be a lot of readers in the New York Times culture section who aren't going to hip-hop concerts, but they're interested in what's going on in the world around them, and so they'll be interested in something like that. And so for the video game stories, some of the readers are hardcore gamers. Some of them don't play games, but they want to know what's going on in the culture around them, and so we're writing for both those audiences. And so if we're able to do that successfully, thank you.
And often I think people have kids or friends who are. Just recently you had a piece in the New York Times, and not you, but it was in the paper, about people finding real-life love through World of Warcraft.
Yeah.
And I know about this because my dad sent me the link. So
Yeah.
he's not much of a gamer, but he knows what I do for sort of a living, my hobbies and such. And thought, oh, here's something Eric would like. So
There's an important validation function that goes on. Not that people need validation, but it's helpful. Once again, with any specialized area, whether it's video games or hip-hop music or whatever it happens to be, when you have a publication like the New York Times that's sort of writing about it respectfully without sort of pointing and giggling, that sort of, then people say, okay, well maybe this is actually legit. And I'll tell you, when the editors came to me and they asked me to write about video games, I said, listen, I'll do it, but I'm not going to write coverage of the point and giggle variety. That's exactly the words that came out of my mouth. Because that's what a lot of it had been. I said, look, I'm not going to do it if I have to sort of denigrate what I'm writing about while I'm writing about it. I mean, obviously it's supposed to be fun, it's entertainment, we're not curing cancer here. But at the same time, when people write about movies or whatever, they take it seriously. And that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and I had one other question on that issue, but you kind of answered it already about what kind of negotiation or give and take there is with your editors in terms of how tech savvy and how inside the info is. But it seems like you've got a pretty good relationship working there.
Actually, before I get to that, can I just sort of volunteer one thing?
Sure.
Because there was I did get some emails, and I'd like to clear up something. There was one point in the story where I said that it's possible that Diablo would be the first Blizzard franchise to appear on consoles like the Xbox 360 and
People
PlayStation
were like,
3.
StarCraft's on this console.
Well, and what I heard, yeah, exactly, was, yes, and I'm very aware that StarCraft and Diablo, and I think a version of Warcraft were on earlier consoles, and the way I phrased that was because it was sort of like, if we had said something that's, whatever, it's the first time appearing on cell phones, like the Android and iPhone, and someone came back and said, well, no, it appeared on the StarTAC in 1996. I don't really consider those comparable. So I just wanted to clear that up, that I was aware of that, and sort of said that on purpose, because I felt like we were implying in the language that we used that we meant modern generation consoles. So I just wanted to clear that up. Now, on your question about the editors, a bad editor thinks they know everything. A good editor knows what they don't know, and they trust their writers to be the experts in their area. And that's something that I've seen throughout my career, and I've got great editors, and they're not game experts at all, and they recognize that. And so rather than trying to sort of give me ideas that don't make sense, and sometimes they give me ideas that make a ton of sense, but they're not trying to micromanage me. So 9 times out of 10, what you'll see under my byline was my idea, and they sort of count on me to let them know what I should be writing about, or more importantly, more broadly, what the Times should be writing about. So it's my job to let them know when big games are coming up and sort of what games are, demand major coverage and what games we can sort of slide on, because there is only one of me.
Yeah. And you've got a pretty prime gig. You can kind of pick and choose your spots to some extent.
It's a certain extent, but look, I mean, when big AAA games come out from major publishers, they have to be covered. And there's just a certain, and I'll tell you, what we've seen over the years is that now, my editors they'll see ads for games on television, whether it's on primetime TV or during sports, major sporting events. And it sort of reinforces to them that, hey, these products are mass entertainment products, no longer a sort of niche hobby product. Now that we're seeing games marketed, just as broadly as movies.
So, that leads us nicely up to the main thrust of the interview here is your very recent visit to Blizzard Irvine.
Mm-hmm.
And the intro to your piece said something about you were in the area visiting family, and you just thought, hey, it'd be nice to stop by Blizzard at some point while I'm here?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I didn't fly out there just to see this game. And I've been to Blizzard many times. And like I said, I have a close and I think trusting working relationship with them. So I want to be clear. I thought it was important for the piece because I don't preview a lot of games usually. I usually wait until games come out because I'm usually afraid of them being vaporware or not coming out for a long time. And Diablo 3 may not be out for some time. So usually I don't like to sort of do preview pieces before you can actually give it a real review. But I felt like, I live in New York, but I have family in Orange County, California, who live not far from the Blizzard offices. And so it's a nice opportunity just to sort of, touch base with obviously one of the top publishers in the world. And one of my favorite publishers, I'm not afraid to say that. And I love Diablo. So any chance I can get to play Diablo is fun for me.
Yeah, so that was, I was going to say, it's also kind of a perk. I mean, you're like, hey, I might get a chance to get some hands-on with Diablo 3 here.
Sure, absolutely.
So you go through your press contacts and you meet someone at Blizzard, someone in PR, I assume, and then they arrange a time and a place, and you show up at the front gate and get through the guards and...
Yeah, the security there is pretty funny, actually. At the original Blizzard offices, I think they moved, I'm going to get this wrong, it's somewhere around 2 or 3 or 4 years ago.
It's about 5 years ago, I think.
Okay, yeah. When the first few times I went to Blizzard in their old offices, they were totally unmarked. There was no signs, there was no nothing, because they were in this random office park, off the 405 freeway, and there were no gates or guards or anything, and so, they had a couple of bad experiences with crazy fans showing up, and so they sort of went for an obscurity defense so that, hopefully nobody would find them. And you would have to, write them at a P.O. box or something, and they didn't want anybody to know. And yeah, they didn't want anybody to know what their address was. But now they have this huge campus. And now there's a big sign that says Blizzard Entertainment. It's sort of an archway, but of course they have a fence now.
Yeah, and huge gate that's like 15 feet tall.
Yeah, and the security, those guys don't mess around. So I was there and, talked to the PR guy. And then we went over to the building, where, D3 is being made. And, before I sat down with Jay Wilson, I had about an hour and 15 minutes, with the game. Or with one of the latest builds of the game, one of the new builds. And I'll be frank here, I'll volunteer. The build that I was playing was actually the same build as from BlizzCon, so it was not a new build. It was, it was frankly, 6 months old. I had not been at BlizzCon, so I hadn't played it before. They told me that they have a new build they're going to be showing to some people in the press in a few months, but they didn't want to, sort of let that out of the bag, so I'm not going to pretend that it was something that no one's seen before. But it was my first time with it. So I had about an hour and 15, and it was actually pretty interesting because walking in, they have this room, not a little room, sort of a big room with like 10 or 15 terminals set up for like group testing. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because the PR guy is like, he sort of sends somebody ahead like, all right, wipe off the whiteboards, make sure that there's nothing that, the journalists can see, as you're like sort of walking by cubicles and offices and stuff. And so they really try to sanitize, what you can see when you're there, which is fine. I'm not sure if it was exactly like the BlizzCon build, but I think all the classes were available, and I've always played pet classes, traditionally for me. Oh, I didn't in D2, and we can come to that in a second. D2 was one of the few times I did not play a pet class. But usually I play pet classes. And so I wanted to play the Witch Doctor, which was obviously the pet class. And, the level that I was on, I think I can't remember, the dungeon, or the torture chambers of the Mad King.
Yeah. All fiery light and orange glow and stuff.
Yeah, it was, a dungeon level. They weren't showing me any crazy terrain at that point or any sort of outdoor. The gameplay, the gameplay is what you'd expect. And that's a good thing. In terms of it being an action RPG, right? I mean, they don't want you to have to manage 15 different abilities. They want you to be able to focus on, a handful of abilities so that you can spam them basically, or, have short cooldowns. And, as opposed to an MMO where they, you sort of have these huge skill trees and you end up with dozens of different skills. And, the actual gameplay was tight, and obviously it's that slot machine effect where the loot is sort of spraying everywhere. One of the things that I thought was interesting was that, if I recall correctly, so when you have different gold drops in one vicinity, you can pick those all up at once. Like when you pick up one gold drop, it'll pick up all the ones around you. But they really do want you to click individually on every different item that drops.
Yeah.
And, that really goes back into that sort of idea of sort of keeping the player clicking, frankly. My level I think was obviously randomized. The same key elements are in the same places, but my PR contact was playing the same level next to me, and he played that level, a million times, so, and I wanted to go through it, sort of get off the main path, make sure I explored every nook and cranny. It was, it's what you expect, but, obviously it's high res, and it looks great, which is, one of the important things, because it's funny, I actually reinstalled Diablo II a few months ago just to sort of get back in the feeling of it, and I just couldn't deal, even with Lord of Destruction, I couldn't deal with the 800 by 600 resolution. You blow it up for a 24-inch monitor, you're like, it looks like crap. I mean, I just couldn't deal with it. So it was great to be able to, have that Diablo experience in 1920 by 1200, and with modern graphics. But of course, they're very concerned with making sure it runs tight and fast. But as I mentioned in my piece, that's pretty much all I saw, right? I mean, was the actual sort of core gameplay, which they're not really trying to change that much. I mean, they're changing things with the skill trees and how you can customize your different skills, and the runes. But the core gameplay, you know what you want from that. And as I said in the piece, I think where the rubber hits the road, I think where the real innovation is going to happen with D3 is in the community and in the economy aspects. And they haven't shown that yet. So, we'll see.
Yeah, you just hit about my next 15 questions in that reply.
Sorry about that.
Well, that's fine. You covered them, but you got a little bit of background stuff. So just backtracking a little bit, you had not played Diablo 3 before that visit.
No, I had messed around with it last summer a little bit. I had stopped
at Blizzard or at Blizzard itself.
No, at Blizzard. I had actually stopped by Blizzard right after E3 last year. Once again, because I have family in Orange County, and so it's a nice twofer for me. And of course, Blizzard doesn't show at E3 anymore because it's such a madhouse because they're so popular.
Yeah. And they don't need to. They can run their own BlizzCon.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's Blizzard and it's Rockstar, right? The two big publishers who can not go to E3. And so having seen all the other publishers at E3, this is now, last year, I wanted to see what Blizzard was up to at that point. So I went there. And what I played last summer was a desert level. I'm not sure if they'd ever shown that publicly, but I had about an hour and a half.
That was almost certainly the 2009 BlizzCon demo, because that was all set in the desert with
That's probably true. I'm sure that's true.
Like you mentioned earlier, they seem to reuse, as far as I know, they've only actually made 3 playable demos, each one for a BlizzCon, and then they just show that for the next year.
And like I said, my understanding is that they're planning to show something to the press over the summer now. That's another new build.
Could be the beta for all we know.
And I don't know anything about that. But it's possible. Although, and I think a beta for Diablo, I'm not sure they won't do it. I have no idea. But I think it's less important for a couple of reasons than for an RTS like StarCraft or for an MMO like WoW, and I can go into that. But no, so I played it a little bit last summer on the desert build, and then I had done it, like you said, a couple weeks ago.
And so it wasn't your very first time touching it, but you hadn't played it for a year.
Yeah.
And obviously, so they bring you into the office and they sit you down in this room with, as you say, 10 or 15 demo machines. And you've got like an hour to play or so, right?
Mm.
And so and you're not like, are your hands trembling and twitching? It wasn't your first time. You've been to this rodeo before, so.
Yeah, no, I mean, I wasn't nervous, but, cause I have no qualms about, I didn't die or anything, but.
Yeah, you were excited though. You were like, oh boy, oh boy.
Oh yeah, look, I'm a Diablo fan. I never counted, but, I played Diablo 2 on US East, strictly on the realms, and many hundreds of hours with Diablo 2. And I played Diablo 1 as well. So I've always been an action RPG fan, and I've always been a Diablo fan, so I was psyched. And one of the cool things was, while I was playing, a couple of developers would come in and sort of look over your shoulder. Mm-hmm. And, they would say things like, it's always interesting for them to see how different people play, right? Because they're so used to it, it's hard for them to understand how people will play it, who haven't played it, haven't been doing it for 5 years. So it was cool to have a couple guys, I don't remember their names, I think it was one art director and one encounter designer, who just would look over the shoulder, because they're very curious to see sort of how people react to it. And actually when they made me leave the room to go sit down with Jay Wilson in his office, it was because I think like 10 or 12 of those guys were about to do some sort of group demo, or sort of not demo, but group testing internally.
Maybe they've got other builds available on those machines that you can't see as
I'm sure they do. Yeah.
They probably have the brand new one right off the network or something.
I'm sure those guys, I have no idea, like we said in the piece, or like Jay Wilson said in the piece, they think that they're in the home stretch. So, I'm sure that internally they can play through 90% of the game at this point. I would suspect, I don't know that for sure, but I would think that they've got most of the game built. That was the impression that I came away with. So internally, I'm sure they've got people, who are playing through it all the time, just to test class balance and how long it takes and all those sorts of things.
It's probably they use that room because it's just nice to have, they've had the machines wired up in groups of 4 at BlizzCons. That's in theory the multiplayer limit, although you can get up to 6 in the arenas.
Right.
But the room you were in is probably used by them to test, Act 3 or Act 4 or something. Just
I have no idea, but there were definitely more than a dozen, roughly a dozen terminals, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I have no idea if they can all jump in at once or internally, do they have some crazy server where like it's free for all and it's like 30 people at once? Possibly, but I don't know.
I think it's probably nice they can all just be in the same room and have immediate feedback as opposed to shouting from their cubicles or using headphones or something.
Right, exactly, yeah.
But, so you get to play and you're like, I want to do the Witch Doctor. You'd plan that before you even got there.
No. I mean, I'll be totally frank with you. I mean, I have not been sort of bird dogging all the news, about sort of every little thing that comes out. So I wasn't even sure. But like I said, I generally play pet classes. And this goes back to much earlier games.
But you knew enough to know the Witch Doctor was the pet class.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah. Oh sure.
Just when we talk to new people about Diablo 3 or people who have first played the game, their first touch, it's like, what were you thinking? What were you waiting? Did you have your character planned out? Some people are just like, I'm going to pick it up and then I'll see where my mouse goes,
Yeah, well, they didn't let me, I can't even remember, I hadn't unlocked, and I can't remember what they're called, I can find my notes somewhere, all the different sort of ways you can customize your character, because I guess they have these points where you can sort of customize, and they're all passive, right? So, you can... Traits, exactly. You can choose different skills at different levels, at different sort of tiers, right? You have to choose. But then you also have these passive traits. And so I didn't have the ability to sort of do a full character build, right? It wasn't like a max level character.
Yeah, they're pre-made characters in the BlizzCon days.
Yeah, and there was only a relatively low level character, so I didn't have it. And once again, it's smart because they don't want people who are just demoing it to be overwhelmed. All the different choices.
So you knew you wanted the Witch Doctor, and you went to the selection screen. Did you go the male or female Witch Doctor?
I went male, yeah.
Did you spend a little time looking at the other characters and, just enjoying the artwork and such, or did you jump right in?
I kind of jumped right in because I knew my time was limited.
Yeah, that's how it goes at the BlizzCon show. We're like, we've only got 20 minutes, play faster.
And what happens is, as good as the characters look on a character selection screen or on a paper doll, when you're actually playing the game, it's isometric and you're not really paying that much attention, frankly, to all the little, character details. I mean, at least I'm not.
Not your first time, certainly, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when you're playing the game, I'm looking at where the mobs are and where the treasure is, and I'm looking at the mini-map to see if I'm missed a corner or something. And the overall environment, So I didn't really sort of spend a lot of time on the character selection screen.
So you jumped right in. When you started playing, did you look at the skill tree menu or the quest menu?
Oh yeah, I went through all that stuff. Yeah. I mean, I walked through all that stuff with the PR guy.
Okay. So you hit the PR guy. So that makes a little difference.
Well, yeah, no, because I to ask questions. So I walked through the skills and the traits and the quests and the inventory, obviously. And there's one of the things I do like is you had to play a lot of Tetris with your inventory before. Mm-hmm. And you still do a little bit, but they want you to have the ability to sort of disenchant. I can't remember what they're calling it exactly, but you can sort of disenchant on the fly.
So salvaging, they call it.
Yeah, salvaging. So you can all the crap white items that you get, you can immediately salvage them to free up inventory space. And those crafting items that you get once you salvage are stackable. Mm-hmm. So
auto-stackable, yeah, so they just immediately pile up.
So unless you're so until your inventory is full of blues or greens or whatever that you actually want to sell to a merchant, you don't have to go back to town, which is, I think it's great because they've set it up so that, it used to be in D2 that, if you wanted to really maximize your revenue generation, you had to go back to town all the time to sell everything. You didn't want to leave anything to waste, which makes sense. But they want you to be able to spend more time in the action now, and less time, sort of just doing the scut work of managing your inventory, which I appreciated.
And you can't go back to town because there's no town portals, so.
Right, but or finding a merchant or whatever it happens to be. And I think they were talking about sort of portable merchants, but maybe that wasn't something they had decided on yet. But I'll tell you, I did find that in the course of that one level, my inventory filled up probably 2.5 to 3 times. But it was okay because I could then salvage most of the stuff. And I wasn't really, I only had an hour, so I wasn't really trying to alright, this gem is going to socket into this item. I wasn't really trying to maximize as I was going through because I knew the character was going to get wiped and I wouldn't be able to hold on to it anyway, so.
Did you spend time looking at your items and playing the whole, and you mentioned the auction house and the item economy in your piece. Did you spend time looking over the items and evaluating?
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, in the level that I played, I got some greens. I don't think there were any blues. I don't think I might have gotten like one blue that I might not have been able to use or something. No legendaries. So the stuff that happened to drop for me wasn't that great. And I didn't get to see, because it's relatively early in the game, I didn't get to see any of the crazy item modifiers. Mm-hmm. And I was, stuff like Life Leech and Mono Leech and Magic Find and like the really good modifiers. Yeah. I didn't see any of that, so I'm not sure how they're balancing those yet. Because those are obviously...
Neither is anybody else. That's one of the itemization thing is always a popular topic.
Well, they know, look, they know that that's the key of the game, right? Is the absolute hook for the entire franchise is the randomization. Not only the dungeons, but perhaps even more importantly of the loot. And, they know that, and look, they'll probably have some item modifiers that we've never even seen before that we can't even think of, like what it would be. And it's less necessary for items and classes have to be balanced, but it's less important for there to be item balance, in a game like Diablo as opposed to a game like WoW, because it's not persistent. And at its core, the actual gameplay is single player, or at most, whatever it is, 4 people. But it's not a persistent world, so if you get some great item, it's okay for it to be a great item. It doesn't have to be balanced against something else, the way it would in a game like WoW.
Yeah, they just recently, like last week, a Chinese website was there visiting, and they got to talk to Jay Wilson, and he revealed that for the first time they're not going to have any bindable items in Diablo III, which is a big impact on the economy compared to all of the binding you see in WoW, obviously.
Remind me, well, there weren't very many bindable items in D2, were there?
There were none.
Yeah.
So they're following the kind of the Diablo tradition.
Well, that's what it's all about. It's all about trading, right?
They had mentioned like 2 years ago they're probably going to have binding on the very highest quality items.
Really?
And there was a lot of fan debate if this will be good, if it's needed to spur the economy, to keep it from, perpetually mudflating.
As long as they are, I'm sure they are, but as long as they can maintain item security, meaning no duping, no hacks, as long as they can do that, then it'll work, right? And as long as they can keep an eye on gold sellers. And, it's very complicated because, as we all remember in D2, gold became basically worthless, and everything was done in SOJs. And then when SOJs got duped, well, it was sort of game over, quite literally, because nobody cared anymore. And so, when you bring in gold farmers, right, when I find some like ridiculously uber item on hell difficulty at the end, right? Mm-hmm. That I can't use for my class, and I want to sell it now, right? It's like it's an awesome item. It's just off the chart, great. Mm-hmm. And I want to sell it. The question is, if I can't find an equal trade, then what is it worth selling for? And I don't know if that's going to be gold. Can they make gold valuable enough that you can actually get enough of it to be worth a great item, or will some sort of de facto barter currency like SOJs emerge? And balancing those things in light of security is incredibly important, because if I end up selling my incredibly awesome item for, I don't know, make up a number, 10,000 gold, whatever, and theoretically that's a big number, well, if it turns out that gold sellers and duping or whatever is devaluing gold, then I just sort of lost my interest in playing the game, or I'm very discouraged from playing the game, because the currency there was no currency that I could get that would make it worth it for me to trade off my uber sick item. And that's, incredibly important for a game like this.
Yeah, that you just touched on a lot of issues that we very frequently debate on this podcast and on the website about, how the economy will work and if there's going to be a de facto currency other than gold.
It would be nice if they could actually make gold worth something.
They've said they're really trying. They constantly talk about that. There's been lots of quotes. We want to make gold meaningful. We want to have more gold sinks.
Yeah, but you can't stop someone from farming gold. And as we've learned, it's incredibly difficult to stop gray market gold sellers, right? Mm-hmm. It's, look, if I personally choose to go, farm up, however many thousands or hundreds, whatever it is, a lot of gold, and then I use some third-party website to make a deal to sell it by PayPal to somebody, that's very hard for them to stop, obviously. And look, and they can ban, and Blizzard's great about this. I mean, I'm not saying they're lackadaisical, and I'm not saying they approve it, because they don't. And they ban thousands and thousands and thousands of accounts. But you can't find everybody. And it's almost inevitable, sadly. Which, raises the question of whether they can make those kinds of currencies meaningful. Because the great thing about an item is that when I trade a great item for another great item, well then, I got equal value for me. Right?
Yeah.
As opposed to some arbitrary amount of gold, which may or may not be worth anything, over inflation down the line. I suspect that, rather than just being gold, that things like, rare runes, and, uber rare runes and sockables, will also be, extremely valuable. And those can always be a good currency for something like this. But I don't know the details.
People are speculating a lot about, I don't know if you followed the gem. There were gems in Diablo 2.
I mentioned gems, runes, whatever you call
And there's gems in Diablo 3. Do you know how many levels of gems there are in Diablo 3?
I do not know.
14 levels of gems.
Okay.
and the current design is that you can only find up to level 5 dropping. And above that, you'll have to, make them in the Diablo 3 version of the Herodric Cube.
In the queue.
Artesians. And that's going to take 3. I think it's 12 levels. But the gist of it is you need 14,000 level 5 gems to make a max level gem.
Now, let me ask you, what do you think of that?
So that's one of the discussion topics. Is that wildly out of whack? Will they have to change obviously we haven't played the game, so we don't know how often gems drop.
Well, I think that's good though, because off the top of my head, I'm just talking off the top of my head here. I haven't thought it through, but you want to set up an economy where it's going to take years for people to get the best stuff, right? You want it so that people still have something to strive for. You don't want a game where 3 months after it's come out, well, I'm max level, I've mastered hell difficulty, there's no more hills to climb except doing the same runs over and over again to maybe find something. I mean, you want it to be so like when someone gets the first, tier 10 gem in 8 months, that's a big deal. And then when someone gets a tier 12 gem in a year, that's a big deal as well. Mm-hmm. And you want to give an incentive for guilds to pool their resources. You want there to be an incentive for you to have friends. Although in a game like Diablo, as opposed to WoW, pooling resources has a lot less meaning. Because you're less dependent on other people, right, to help you succeed quite as much, right? Mm-hmm. In a game like WoW, well, yes, you want to pool your resources so that everybody on the raid, has flasks and whatever, right? Because you need everybody to have that stuff, or else everybody fails. But Diablo is the kind of game where you're sort of more independent as an individual player, even though you might have guilds that tend to be more social. But like I said, I think what they're thinking about is they want there to be stuff in the game, beyond the randomization aspect, right? Because remember, the first time somebody kills a hell boss, they could get as great an item as someone a year and a half from now killing the same boss. You just don't know. So I guess they also want to have a more sort of linear progression curve at a different part of the game. So what you're saying for the gems sounds like that to me. So that there'll continue to be stuff to aspire to going down the road.
Another one of the big aspiration points is something you mentioned with the salvaging, is there's going to be these very rare high-level recipes you can find and then give to your artisans. No one's seen artisans in the demo yet, but we've seen, they've talked about them and shown us pictures. And once you have these really high-level recipes, they can make, potentially the best items in the game with them. But to make those items, they require a lot of materials, including very rare materials that you can only obtain by salvaging very rare items.
I think that's good. Once again, so you need to get the drop of the recipe. So that's like a random rare drop.
Yeah,
but then
you
also
need the super rare materials, and then you need to get lucky crafting it, which might be, might take you 20 times. The crafting recipes are semi-random. There's a few preset mods, and the rest are, it's like a rare item in Diablo.
Once again, the idea is that they want you to have to play Diablo 3 every day, all the time.
Yeah.
And it's their job to make a product that people want to play all the time. And, it sounds like, you know more about the details than I do, but it sounds like, all those things are like stuff that they want people to have a reason to keep playing forever and stop eating and breathing and sleeping.
Yeah.
And not literally, but, they want to make a product that people want to keep using, and as they should.
And they've also mentioned the with the no binding thing. They're saying they're going to be doing their plan is to make an expansion every 18 months or so, and they're also planning on doing regular patches with new items and new upgrades. So to some extent, they don't need to have any item binding because there's going to be new best items every 3 or 6 months anyway.
Yeah, but I think, look, I can't speak for them, but they're very smart folks, and I think it is different from a game like WoW in the sense that, in WoW, when a new expansion comes out, everything before it is immediately obsolete, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, all of a sudden your questing greens, within a day after, going into a new expansion in WoW, your questing greens are as good or better as, high-level dungeon loot from the previous version. This is different. I think, and I suspect that they'll be smart enough to not want everything that came before it to be obsolete with every expansion. They want to layer on, but I think they'll be smart enough to realize that they don't want people to feel like, well, everything I do now is going to be completely worthless in 18 months. I think they're smart enough to avoid that trap.
And the randomization of items in Diablo seems to help with that, where you could find a spectacularly good rare item that you might never improve upon, just, the combination of mods that it spawned with. That's right. As opposed to WoW, where the items are a little more custom designed.
It's not a little more. Everything has to be done by hand. There is no randomization there's very little randomization in the loot, in the itemization in WoW. You might be random when you find something, right? You might find a BOE epic from some random trash mob. That's like a 1 in 1,000 chance. But the actual item itself is not random. And that's because they're very cognizant and aware of how they need to make sure that items are comparable across various tiers of content, right? They want to make sure that when you go do some crazy 20-person raid or whatever, that what you're getting out of that for that effort is better than what you could find from a random, a BOE from a random trash mob. And then they need to balance, all right, how good do we want the crafting to be, right? And, all right, we want the crafting goods to be equivalent to 5-person dungeon loot, but not quite as good as 10-person instance, and so on and so forth. And they need to balance all that because you have a persistent community of people, whatever it is, 10,000 people or whatever, and they're spending years in that one community, hopefully, as opposed to a game like Diablo, where every time you jump in, you might be playing with different random people, and you might not ever talk to them at all, or you might just play alone on the realms and whatever. So that balancing isn't quite as important in a game like Diablo, and Blizzard obviously understands all these things.
I think also the balancing per individual character in WoW, because you have to fill a role in your party to raid.
Yep.
You can't have a tank who doesn't have, some sort of resistance or defense or something.
That's a great point.
You gotta make sure the items he gets. Whereas, as you say, Diablo 3, the characters are much more varied and you can kind of do your own thing.
Well, and also, you're sort of raising an interesting point. In Diablo, every character class has to be able to solo. Right?
Yeah. All classes are DPS classes.
Every class has to be able to take care of itself. Because if you look, lots of people will play Diablo completely alone all the time. And look, they'll do the community and the economy, but maybe they don't want to jump into a level with other people. And that has to be okay. That has to be a choice that they're able to make. As opposed to a game like WoW, where that cooperation is absolutely enforced. It's a core part of the gameplay, or any MMO, in terms of having different character classes and roles, so that people have to cooperate in order to tackle the hardest content.
One little digression here. Our first podcast I did with this, I interviewed Max Schaefer, who was, one of the Diablo 1 and Diablo 2 guys, and is now making Torchlight. And he revealed to us, the first time anyone's ever said this, as far as I know, that Diablo 3 was initially designed as an MMO when they were making it at Blizzard North back in 2001.
It doesn't surprise me.
So up until he left, if you recall, when the Big Four left, as they called them, and formed Flagship Studios in 2003. Up to that point,
Max, Eric, Bill Roper, and who's the fourth?
Dave Revick.
Right. I actually did an article about Flagship when they were making Hellgate. And I'm really sad that game didn't work out, but I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
Yeah, I ran our Hellgate fan site, so I was very sad it didn't work out. I spent 2 years following that and played it many times.
And I liked it, but I think what we're seeing, even now in Diablo, randomizing a full 3D environment is a lot tougher than randomizing an isometric 2D. But I didn't realize that about the Diablo MMO, and I like Torchlight a lot. I've actually been playing a fair bit of it. I'm looking forward to Torchlight 2. That's coming out very soon, right?
Yeah, later this summer. July or August is what I've been told.
I'm totally into Torchlight 2. It'll be my fix until Diablo. I love all action RPGs, not all of them, but I love the genre. I'm playing actually a fair amount of Darkspore right now. I'll be writing about that in the next week or so. But,
nice plug.
Well, no, it's not a plug. It's not as good as Diablo. Diablo basically invented this entire genre. And whether it was Titan Quest or then Torchlight, and Darkspore trying to do the same sort of thing. But what we've seen over the years is that what Blizzard makes not look, I'm gonna say easy, but what they do is very, very difficult for anybody else to replicate, and nobody learned that lesson harder than the flagship guys.
Mm-hmm. They've talked about that a great deal. I actually didn't talk to Max much about that because it's been gone over so many times in previous interviews.
No, of course.
But we've been speculating a lot about what Diablo III as an MMO could have been, just in terms of what you and I mentioned a moment ago. The class roles, everybody's a DPS class. How do you make a meaningful MMO when everybody can sort of do their own thing?
Well, I think the answer is
nobody knows.
Well, the answer is they didn't make it, right?
Yeah.
And the answer is they tried it and it didn't work.
Pretty much everybody who was heading up the development left the company in 2003 or 4. And then they kind of had a new, everybody else who was still there got promoted, and they started off a new direction of it. And then that all got canceled again in 05 when Blizzard North closed, and they started up the current version, which is pretty much a reboot. So, as you say, nobody knows, and it might not have worked out at all. But I'll probably talk to Max again sometime around Torchlight 2's launch, and I'll see if I can get a few more questions to him about, how would it have been as an MMO? What was your goal? Because obviously Blizzard Irvine was well into production on World of Warcraft at that point.
Yep.
And they wouldn't have released 2 MMOs that had more or less the same play style. It doesn't seem. They would have been competing with themselves.
I completely. Well,
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, they must have had some original design idea or different goals with D3 MMO.
Well, you have to remember that, and I'm going to get this history slightly sloppy, but it was, Blizzard acquired the Schaefer brothers, right? And the original Diablo.
When they were making Diablo 1, they bought their company.
They bought their company. So, that whole franchise, it's of the big 3 for Blizzard so far, it's the one that came from outside. And they obviously shelved the MMO component of it so they could focus on WoW. And now, of course, they're making their new unannounced MMO, which nobody knows anything about.
Well, we have a few hints, but I'll send you a link. It's mostly speculation, though.
I can almost guarantee you that it's all speculation at this point.
Yeah. Well, it's all speculation, but it's based on some of the things they've said about what they want to focus on for their future game worlds. But anyway, so after your Diablo 3 play session, you got about an hour on the playtime and had fun and did your witch doctor thing. Mm-hmm. And then you went and talked to Jay Wilson.
That's right.
And you talked to him for, half an hour or something? Or?
Something like that. Yes, half an hour, maybe 40 minutes, but half an hour. And I had met him at least a couple times before. Including the previous summer. And all the Blizzard guys, they know what they can talk about and what they can't. And, they're very regimented and controlled in terms of, what they're sharing when. So, all of my most important questions for me about the economy and the community, he basically just, he's very good at sort of giving that stone face, not acknowledging, not giving you any clues, if what you're saying is what they're working on or not. But it's not that they're rude or anything. He's a, very nice guy, but there was a lot that he wasn't willing to share, at this point. And for me, I'm not gonna sit there and
see your Skype. I just sent you a funny link. If you can see your Skype chat, click that image. And it said someone just made that of Jay last week.
Let me.
Speaking of his serious face.
I'm not a Skype pro. I'll try to make this work here.
If you hover on the little window, it'll show like a little.
Yeah, I saw the thing.
Like a question balloon.
Yeah, I saw the thing. Here we go. Yeah, I got it. Yeah.
I can edit out the last 10 seconds of our back and forth here when we post this, but. Speaking of Jay's serious face, as you say.
Let me see. I'm pulling it up. That's good.
That was just posted a few days ago. So anyway,
no, that's fine.
Sorry to interrupt, but it seemed relevant.
That's good. He couldn't talk about a lot of the stuff I wanted to talk about, and for me, for my reader, the New York Times reader, they're not really concerned with the granularity of this skill versus that skill, or sort of very sort of nitty-gritty details that we as players care about. But the New York Times reader isn't really interested in the really hardcore nitty-gritty of the particulars of classes and abilities and stuff like that. So the stuff that sort of is more understandable and intelligible for the layperson is the economy, which I think really is where this game has to be made or is going to make or break. And the stakes are really high. I mean, it's I used to have to sit in a chat channel for hours spamming some item that I wanted to sell, and there were hundreds of trade channels on US East. And then if you had a really good item, you would go to an external site, and I believe you ran Diablo2.net. Is that right?
Yeah, DiabloII.net was the site I ran.
Yeah, DII.net. Yeah, I mean, like the marketplace there, I used to sell stuff on there all the time, because that was your only way of sort of reaching out to the entire community, right? Mm-hmm. Who might be at work at some point. If I had some awesome legendary or epic item, and you'd sell it on an external website, all that has to go away now with Diablo 3. And it's vital that they, like I said in the piece, create tools so that people can trade and do various sorts of auction house functionality in a way that's easy and seamless and doesn't feel like work and torture, like sitting in a chat channel and spamming for hours. And the real question is, do they want to have the Diablo 3 economy, span everybody in North America? I mean, I assume it won't be, global, right? But for instance, when I put an item up for sale on whatever the auction house interface happens to be, does that mean that the other, 5 million people or whoever who are playing Diablo, or 10 million or whatever the number happens to be, people can all see it? Hopefully the answer is yes. But what you're going to end up with, if that's the case, is, millions of people posting potentially hundreds of millions or tens of millions of items, and doing, hundreds of millions of transactions potentially every day, and that's just a ridiculously huge and challenging database problem and programming challenge. Not to mention just sort of making the interface usable. But for me personally, I mean, that's what I want. I want to be able to set up want ads, right? Where, all right, if somebody finds or puts up for sale an item with these stats in this slot in this way with this number of sockets, then here's my offer, right? Not just auction houses are traditionally the seller puts something up for sale, and you look for something that you like. But why shouldn't I be able to do the exact opposite as well and put up a want ad? That's sort of a passive filter that says, all right, once again, like I put all this money into escrow, or whatever the items or currency are, I put it into escrow so that if somebody somewhere, like I said, finds a certain kind of item with this long list of particular stats that I want, that I can immediately snap it up or at least put in a bid. And these are the kinds of things that Jay Wilson won't talk about right now, understandably, but they're going to have to answer, and that we're going to see in the game, because that's what gives something like this the community and the legs to be successful for years and years.
Yeah, so you focused on that for your piece on the New York Times article, somewhat out of personal interest, but also because you think that's something that the general public could identify with, and because you think that's a really key aspect of the game.
Yeah, I mean, all three. I mean, I think that's what's going to make, hopefully every Blizzard game should be totally groundbreaking in its own way, right? I mean, I think that's their goal for themselves, and I think that's the expectation that we have for them. Going back to the origination of Battle.net, right? I mean, Battle.net was, pretty much the original big PC gaming community. And, Battle.net, just the ability to have any of this sort of rudimentary community functions was the root of the success of Diablo 2, certainly. Not to mention the Warcraft RTSs going forward. But so they need to now innovate again, or I like to hope they'll innovate again and show us something on those functions that no one's ever even tried to do before. No other company has ever even come close to being able to do. At least that's what at least what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, it's as you say, it's going to be very interesting how the economy works, and if they're able to do sort of their own Diablo 3 version of eBay, or if people will use third-party sites to sort things, or if they'll become big middleman sellers.
People won't look if their job or their goal is to keep everybody on the reservation, and by that I mean if they give people the right tools, people won't have to go anywhere else, right? I mean, there is no such thing as third-party WoW economy sites. You don't have to, because they've built the tools into the game to allow people to do what they want in that game. And as far as they're concerned, I mean, it's sad for fan site developers, but at a certain level, in terms of the core functionality of the game itself, they want to be able to own that and control that, as they should. And so they should want to be able to build all this stuff into the game. And look, I should be able to check my Diablo 3 auctions on my iPhone, right? I mean, they've done that for WoW, and do all these sort of, crazy advanced functionality, so that, once again, they want you to be in that community whether you're playing the game or not, right? While you're at work, while you're at school, you're thinking about, okay, like, is my polearm about to sell or not? Or whatever it happens to be. Or, geez, did somebody put up that rune I've been looking for sale? Like, I hope I can snag it. And, while you're taking your kids to school or whatever it happens to be, it's their job to create a game that sort of lets you put as much, or get as much out of it, or put as much into it as you can. That's what any great game does, right? It sort of lets you sort of pour yourself into it as much as you are comfortable pouring yourself into it.
It seems like the hard thing will be something you just mentioned, whereas, there's lots and lots, there's hundreds of WoW servers around the world, I guess. There's only, 10,000 or 20,000 people on each server, whereas we might have 3 Diablo 3 servers with millions of people.
That's what I'm talking about.
And how do you get your eBay system of listing items so people can actually find what they want, and like you say, posting their own want ads kind of thing.
And look, they may decide that they have to segment it out, which would be sad, but it may just be, they may say, you know what? We can only do macro economies of 250,000 people and have it work properly, or 500,000 people, or 1 million people, which to them are small numbers, right? Any other game company would give their eye teeth. But for Blizzard, they may have to do that, but I hope that they don't. We'll just have to see.
And, you look at how eBay works, something like that. They have these power sellers who kind of have a higher status level because they do lots and lots of selling, and they kind of act as almost as de facto middlemen. Where there might be, some power seller for Diablo 3, like, Rune Master or something. And all he specializes in is getting hold of runes. And if you want a rune, he's the one to go to.
He's the guy.
And he does all this lower level trading with kind of small stakeholders.
Look,
and centralize it. And maybe you pay a little more, but he's got a selection.
Hey,
instead of searching, the classifieds for an hour trying to find your 1 level 5 rune,
you go to your one-stop shop.
Yeah.
It's possible. Look, I mean, just like, well, in WoW it's a little bit different. Like, there are people who play the auction house all the time, but it's not really a substitute for like the combat and exploration and stuff. Because frankly, the economy is not as important a part of WoW as it is to Diablo. That's because all the best stuff is BOP and and so forth. But in Diablo, it's all about trading. When you ask them, what is the core thought of Diablo, I think we quoted it in the piece, they'll tell you the core of Diablo is trading. And so there may be people who, like, don't spend very much time at all actually playing the game in terms of, like, killing monsters, and spend all their time, or most of their time, playing the economy. And there's something wrong with that. It's a completely different play style, but it's totally valid. I mean, I used to play, or until very recently, played a lot of an MMO called EVE Online, which is a science fiction MMO. But there are plenty of people in EVE who, as the saying goes, never undock their spaceships. What they are financiers and industrialists and traders, most importantly, who all they do is buy and sell all day, and they get fabulously wealthy in that game's economy. And if Diablo sort of enables people who, want to play spreadsheets, and get rich that way, then I say more power to them.
And that provides a service to people who just want to play.
Sure, absolutely. And so the more different play styles that a game can cater to and maintain balance among, the better, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, games shouldn't force you to play their way. They should let you play your way within the context of a coherent system.
It seemed like your piece was leading up to an auction house reveal almost, the way it was structured.
Sadly.
So you didn't get any secret information from Jay Wilson and you're withholding or anything. This is just your personal feeling and your hope.
Yeah, well, for me, I mean, look, I mean, I have a platform, thankfully, where hopefully you can sort of say what you hope happens. And either it encourages them to make it happen, or when it does finally happen, you look like you were ahead of the ball. Either way, it's a win-win. And frankly, it's doing a service for Blizzard, because eventually I'm going to review this game, and if it doesn't have, I'm not expecting in the world, but I can hope for anything I want as a gamer, right? I want this thing to be the best game it can possibly be. But it's sort of letting them know and where the stakes are, or not what the stakes are, but what the measuring sticks are. Because the core gameplay sort of is what it is. We know what that is, and it's great. It's fine. It's wonderful. It's Diablo II. It's high res, different classes, slightly tweaked sort of skill and trait structures, but we know sort of roughly what that feels like. And once again, they want that to feel familiar. Or I'm thinking that and hoping that they innovate and show us something that totally blows us away. That wow, I've never seen anything like this before. Is on that community and economy and trading side.
Well, in theory, we're not going to have to wait too much longer to get some info about this. They have their PR guy, their community manager guy, Bashiak, has said that they were going to reveal all the major features before the beta test begins.
Yeah,
and so. They'll have to say something about an auction house, as we've been discussing here, and most people are expecting there's going to be some sort of guild support, and most likely some sort of mercenary system in the game as well.
What do you mean by that? By mercenary system? I'm curious.
Like just hiring an NPC to kill stuff for you, kind of the Diablo II style of that.
Oh, sure. Okay.
They've said they want to have hireables and followers of some kind, and that they'll be bigger and better than Diablo 2. But of course, you know how they are. They don't actually give any details until they're ready to give lots of details.
Like I said, my impression, my impression that they're planning on doing that at some point this summer.
Yeah, and actually Monday is what we're calling Unicorn Day, as sort of a joke on their potential secret level stuff. Is they have the first quarter financial results conference call. Activision Blizzard is coming up Monday afternoon.
And they'll probably give some insight into what's going on here.
And 3 months ago, in the previous quarterly one, Mike Morhaime said we hope to have an announcement about the beta this time in our next call. Oh. And so there's a lot of. We're recording this on Friday afternoon, and Monday. This will probably go up Monday morning as a podcast, and hopefully later that afternoon we'll get some interesting information.
Yeah,
about a potential beta start date.
What's your feeling on when this thing's what's your gut on when this is actually going to come out? The retail.
I had been looking at mid-2012 for the last couple of years.
And are you
just because they're Blizzard that they always take so long?
Mm.
But they've really made a lot of comments the last 4 or 5 months, making it very clear they're really aiming for late 2011.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I don't know anything, but there was one of these other conference calls or one of their financial disclosures. There was something about how they weren't counting on Diablo III in the 2011 calendar year.
Yeah, that was the one 3 months ago. That was much controversy.
Right. And everyone was like, "Oh, does that mean it's slipping to 2012?" And I will say that when you ask Blizzard about that, they're like, "That doesn't mean that. We're not saying it does mean this." But they're trying not to. They're trying not to say that. Oh, it's definitely 2012. And my impression, just as I said in the piece, where Jay says we're in the home stretch, I think they, I don't know anything, but I think they want to get it out this holiday. But we'll see if they make it or not.
Yeah, I would think that, it's hard to say from what we've seen as fans playing it. I mean, you see how polished the demo you played was. I played, the last 3 BlizzCon demos, and even the 2008 one seemed really polished and final. I mean, it was better than lots of finished games that I've played, lots of release games.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah.
But of course, it's just one small area, and, it's a very microcosm view. And for us, it seems like, oh wow, they're almost done. But of course, that was 2.5 years ago, and they're still working.
I think, look, I said, I don't know anything, but my impression, my sense, is that my sense is that they're largely finished building content. Meaning, I think they know, the zones, the encounters, the artwork, the mobs, the itemization. I think all that core gameplay, my sense is largely in the bag. Of course, nothing's finished until it's really finished, but like we've been talking about, I think that what they're really jamming on, or what they have to, are the networking elements of this, the social part and the economy part. And my sense is that that's largely different people, right? I mean, you can't really take an artist who, look, there were tons of artists, drawing pictures of different things for years, but that same artist is not the same person who's going to build your back-end database infrastructure for the economy. It's just a different skill set. And so, Blizzard's very skilled at sort of rotating their teams and sort of, moving people around at different parts of projects. And, the first, one of the first, you have design, but, building assets just takes a lot of time. My sense is, like I said, is that that's largely done, and that what they're working on now is all the stuff around it, the packaging, that will really sort of, make the game sing, hopefully.
The one worry I have on that front is that the StarCraft 2 demo, the StarCraft 2 beta was set to start, I believe it was last summer, or the summer before last even. It was late 2009. Mm-hmm. And they said they were all ready to go, and then they had to delay it for basically 6 months because the new BattleNet 2.0 BattleNet, as we call it, features were not finished yet. Mm-hmm. And as you just pointed out, looks like that's what they're still really toiling on with Diablo 3, trying to get this auction house and guild support and matchmaking for arenas and everything else set up.
Yeah, I think matchmaking, it's important to take those sort of one by one a little bit. StarCraft 2, I get this right, was the first big new game that was on the new BattleNet.
Yes.
Right? So they had to do a lot of that sort of back-end core BattleNet sort of, friends lists and matchmaking and tracking and ranking and those kinds of things. They did have to get right, but sort of StarCraft 2 was, I don't want to say the guinea pig, but it was the first game that had to sort of get that stuff done. So I think that they've probably worked a lot of that out. But as you mentioned, as we've been talking about, Diablo 3 raises a whole set of additional challenges that have no meaning in an RTS. They're just much more complicated. And it's stuff that's outside of the actual gameplay, but it's what we've been talking about in terms of the guild support and the economy and trading and stuff.
And you look at StarCraft 2, they didn't even have chat channels until 6 months after release. That was something that fans really wanted, and they didn't initially include in the BattleNet. So they can certainly still be working on things, up to and during and post-release.
Yeah, implementing a chat channel isn't that tough for them.
It took
for them.
It took them 6 months of StarCraft, so who knows what.
Well,
I don't think it was all technical limitations.
No, I think it's deciding we want to do it in the first place, and then how are we going to do it? Yeah. But look, Blizzard's been running chat channels for more than a decade now. Look, the cross-game chat worked right off the bat. That was cool as hell. The StarCraft to WoW sort of, cross-game chat functionality. That all worked right off the bat. My memory is. And so, that was awesome. What are you most concerned about with the game right now?
I don't know. I have, I'm not designing it, so I spend more time worrying about the website and the
You're
community.
fan number one. Or whatever. You're in charge of the big Diablo 3 fan community. So, or what are the fans saying? What's your sense of what the fans care about at this point? What are they worried about?
Everything and anything. We have very busy forums, and there's a lot of debate, but people tend to chase the shiny to some extent, more than I would expect.
What do you mean by that?
Just a release date, beta start date, whatever's newest. We have a lot of more fundamental core discussions of game elements and runes and skills and balance and all that kind of stuff. But it seems like, every 6 weeks there'll be some comment about maybe when the beta might start, and then that dominates the conversation for the next week.
And how has your relationship with Blizzard been?
That's a whole other issue. I could give you an interview for an article on that one. Blizzard PR has become very controlling and very message-oriented.
That's right. Oh, that's true.
I was covering this back in 2000 even, when I first kind of got involved in the website stuff, actually in the late 90s. And myself and two other people working on the Diablo II.net website were the first people ever invited to Blizzard North to see the game. Mm. And that was done by Blizzard North. That was not done by Blizzard PR. Blizzard North was much more into the community. They had developers very often in our chat rooms and in our forums. And they really liked to talk directly to people and not go through a layer of PR bureaucracy. Mm. It's always been very insulating at Blizzard Irvine. And has only become much, much more so in recent years.
Oh, sure. I think it's... Okay, I agree it can be frustrating, but, we all have to appreciate the fact that as part of a publicly traded company, they have... And this is all highly material information for the movement of the ACTI stock. Mm-hmm. And you have traders in the SEC and stuff involved. And this is all information that will move those stocks that they have to be at a certain level controlling. But I agree, it can be frustrating. But they want to get their message out first. At a certain level, it's almost like going over the top of the media. in the sense that they want people to hear about their product from them, as opposed to hearing about it from me or from you or from GameSpot or IGN or anybody else. And that's their philosophy. And yeah, I agree it can be frustrating, but I can also understand it.
Yeah, I understand their motivations on it. And about a year and a half ago, they sent out a memo to all of their World of Warcraft fan sites listing what you could and couldn't discuss if you wanted to stay in the fan site program.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
And so it was I mean, I wouldn't say Orwellian, but it was pretty, you can't talk about other games, you can't do any data mining, you can't post things we don't want you to talk about, you can't have all these quotes. And a lot of the leading World of Warcraft sites, including the one that's on our other IncGamers website, refused to be in it. They said, we'd rather not be in the fan site program than have to muzzle ourselves to this extent.
Well, that's the converse question. What are they providing you as part of their official program that makes it worth it?
Yeah, not much. That's the thing. They give us, we're not, and that never actually happened with Diablo III in terms of them sending out a list, but we've just not really had any contact directly with them. I speak to their community manager Bashiak via instant messaging sometimes, but we didn't get our free web press passes to BlizzCon last year, and they've done their last couple of interviews through different fan sites, who are, as my coworker calls them, fawn sites, FAWN sites.
Yeah.
Where they pick sites that they think will say exactly what they want to say and only say friendly things and not offer any criticism or analysis. And those are the ones that get the perks. And the other websites, we think of ourselves more as a voice of the fans as opposed to a fan site. That's kind of our interpretation of the term.
Well, more power to you. And look, I mean, when I deal with them, there are no ground rules. It's not like the New York Times is going to agree to ground rules.
Yeah.
But at the same time, so what they do is instead, they only tell you what they want you to know. And that's, like I said, that's fine, because otherwise it's a disaster, because I think it's much worse for them when expectations are dashed than it is when there are no expectations at all. And they know how these communities work. If they say that they're going to do a beta on such and such a, time frame, and then they have to delay it, it's like the sky is falling. Right? I mean, everyone's like, oh no! So they're much more likely to just not announce it at all until it's happened, basically, or it's about to happen.
Yeah, they've learned over the years to not promise things
promises they can't deliver. And to their credit, this is what makes Blizzard Blizzard, is they've never let themselves be painted into a corner by expectations or by schedules. And even when it was painful to have to delay something, they always put making the game first. And were always willing to delay it, until it was where they wanted it to be. Even when it, caused a lot of consternation among the fans. So I think they've learned it's better just to let the fans speculate, and not give them expectations that we're not 1,000% on, rather than vice versa.
Yeah, just to add one last little thing, not to make this sound like a pity fest, a self-pity fest, but they seem to be much more focused on mainstream media and social media, and obviously they love having Mr. New York Times come and write a piece about them. Yeah, but whereas fan sites, obviously our readers are pretty much in the bag already. We're big slow-moving fish in a barrel for their marketing department. So they don't really need to cater a great deal to people who are devoting their time to following a Diablo III fan site 2 years in advance. Those are pretty much guaranteed sales. And all their current media outreach is via Facebook and via Twitter and via, other major media.
Well, like I said, look, once again, though, but Facebook and Twitter and me are very different. Facebook and Twitter, once again, it's about sort of taking the media of any kind out of the equation. Right? I mean, it's, whether it's a fan site or the New York Times or whoever it is, CNN, or it doesn't matter. All of a sudden now they're able to communicate directly. And like I said, they'd rather communicate directly with the fans than deal with any intermediaries. But, something like the New York Times, like we talked about before, is valuable to them because it provides that sort of broader legitimization factor, and it puts Diablo III in front of people who never would have cared about it otherwise.
Yeah,
right. People who had never even heard of it. Right. It's the mass market. It's like, oh wow, that game sounds interesting. But when you talk about Twitter or Facebook or a fan site, or even, a big-time professional game site like a GameSpot or an IGN, those are catering to people who already know that they're interested. And what we've learned in the big growth in video games over the last 6 to 8 years has been among people who weren't playing games at all before, right?
Or hadn't since they were 10.
Or hadn't in many years. It hadn't in decades. Exactly right. It's bringing people who didn't think of themselves as gamers, right? You got 60 million or whatever it is people playing Farmville every month. They don't think of themselves as gamers, but they're playing a game.
A lot of gamers don't think of them as gamers either. But
that's fine. But hey, I mean Look, I mean, but they are. I mean, and this idea, I remember it's fascinating because when I first started this job, gamers were all sort of like, no one gets us, nobody understands, everyone hates us, the mainstream doesn't like us. And then as soon as like mainstream people started playing other video games, they're like, wait, those aren't real gamers. Like, you can't have it both ways, or you can, but you can try to have it both ways. But yeah, I mean, like, the hardcore gamer traditionally is becoming a smaller and smaller part of the overall video game economy. That's just because the growth in this overall market is in casual games, mobile games, and in making things like, not in the last year, but over the last 8 years, things like the Wii, Guitar Hero, and even WoW. I mean, WoW pulled in millions and millions of people who not only had never played an MMO before, but had never really played any sort of PC game in any meaningful way before. And I mean women, I mean families. And, they recognize, going back to the Mr. T ads, that this was a way to reach people who just weren't playing video games at all, rather than sort of competing for a bigger slice of a static pie. Does that make any sense?
We could do a whole other podcast on that. That's another major element that the fans, the long-time, self-proclaimed hardcore Diablo fans have had a lot of critiques and debates about the sort of consoleization or the dumbing down, as people say, call it in insulting terms, of Diablo 3's features.
Sure. Well,
they think it's being watered down for the mass market.
Well,
and other people say, well, Blizzard games are supposed to be easy to learn, and then, the complexity and the depth is revealed over time.
You're 100% right. Look, it has to be both, like we were talking about with the writing. It's got to appeal to the hardcore and to the casual person, and it's very difficult to make a product of any kind that appeals to both. But Blizzard, I mean, WoW is a great example. I mean, WoW has always extremely casual players, and then it's got its, uber ridiculously. I was one of them. I raided 5 nights a week for 2 years. So but both of those audiences were both very happy with their $15 a month.
And that's obviously a very hard balance to achieve.
Yeah, it absolutely is.
Especially without $15 a month for Diablo 3.
Yeah, but the randomization in Diablo, though, is a great equalizer. Because some random noob has as much chance of finding some awesome item as some, hardcore player. Now, of course, they don't have as many chances because they're not playing as much. But at any given moment in the game, right, it doesn't know how good a player you are. If you're alive, you have the same chance to get a great item as anybody else. And that is and that's not the case in WoW, right? In WoW, you have to be hardcore in order to get to the best stuff. In a game like Diablo, that's not the case at all. Some random, like I said, some random person there has equal chance to find a legendary item as, someone who's, been spending the last 3 years, min-maxing their skill tree.
Yeah, assuming that they kill the same monster.
Oh, yeah, right.
There's also magic find gear and other ways to increase your odds.
But as a basic principle, right? Well, look, I mean, to find the magic find gear in the first place, right? The hardcore player will play the economy more and will go get better stuff. But what I mean is the game structure itself is set up so that everyone who is alive and kills a certain monster has the same base chance as anybody else of getting the same stuff. And that, like I said, it's very different than an MMO.
Yeah, you don't need 20 other people to help you kill the monster, for one thing.
No, exactly. Right. Precisely.
Okay, well, Seth, thanks for your time.
Thank you. Flux, this has been great, and stay in touch.
Yeah, you too, and good luck with your next Blizzard piece.
And keep me posted. I mean, like, I'm counting on you to keep me posted on what's going on.
Sure.
Like,
I can.
If there's major stuff happening in the community, I want to know about it.
Sure, I'll fire you off a link. Maybe even as soon as Monday, which we're calling Unicorn Day, hoping for some announcements.
Keep me posted, Flux.
All right, talk to you later, Matt.
Thanks, man.